Gorr, the God Butcher. He's definitely up there for one of the worst enemies Thor has ever faced. One of the biggest threats Asgard has ever seen. But what if Gorr wasn't fighting against Thor? What if he was fighting against somebody just a little more powerful? Like, say, Odin. Who's gonna come out on top then? Odin or Gorr the God Butcher? Well, let's get into it. But before we get into it, well, if you think that Odin takes it, well, be sure to hit the subscribe button. And if you disagree, if you think that Gorr wins, well, turn on that notification bell. Now let's get it. And starting out, well, there's Gorr, the God Butcher. He was born on a distant planet with no name, constantly living on the brink of death and starvation, taught to trust the gods with all his problems and prayers, except the gods never bothered to listen or answer. After a life of tragedy after tragedy, just one horror after another, Gorr came to believe that maybe there was no such thing as gods. That's why they never answered his prayers, because they didn't exist. Of course, that was kinda hard to square when he witnessed two gods battling to the death in the sky above him, a dark elder god called Null, and a gold armored, purple skinned god. The gold god plunged out of the sky and crash landed nearby. Shocked by the realization that gods did exist, Gorr was enraged when the gold armored god begged for help. Instead, Gorr used a weapon he found on the god's body, all black the Necro Sword, to kill the gold armored god, then vowed to seek vengeance against all gods for never answering his prayers, and set out to kill them all. Gorr is incredibly strong, easily beating up on Thor, all different types of Thor. Yeah, Gorr can fight against three different versions of Thor at once. That's on a whole other level. I mean, one of these versions of Thor was even King Thor, a literal Sky Father. He was even more powerful than Odin. I mean, Thor didn't even tap into the Odin Force anymore. It was actually renamed the Thor Force because of just how powerful he was. He's able to easily beat Galactus. He's able to beat up on Wolverine, who possessed the Phoenix Force. He's a universal level threat out there, throwing around both Mjolnir and the Odin Sword. This was just one of the versions that Gorr was fighting against. He was also fighting against Avenger Thor, the same Thor that we know, the same Thor that Odin usually easily handles. Then a young Thor. But beating up on King Thor is just crazy. He can also take a crazy amount of punishment, just all sorts of massive blows and punches from many different Thors and really many different gods. I'm talking world shattering blows. He survived lightning strikes from Thor, some really pretty serious lightning strikes. He was just unbothered by Thor throwing literal stars at him, was even sent flying whole light years by some of these blasts. Gorr is incredibly tough, just almost on a whole other level. And Gorr is a whole other animal with all black the Necro Sword. Because not only is he able to pierce through and slaughter and butcher countless gods, but like we said, he's able to beat three different Thors all at once. He's able to destroy whole planets and cut stars in half. Pretty much everything that he could possibly want to do. Form constructs like giant serpents or giant swords or even whole planets. He can engulf stars and planets and even the whole universe in darkness. The whole universe. And each of these constructs, these black berserkers, are able to kill gods all by themselves. It takes Thor hours to kill just one. They're even able to overwhelm King Thor. And just watch out for when they transform all into one giant serpent. That's the big guy that you really got to look out for. But then there's the Allfather, Odin. And Odin is capable of doing some absolutely wild and crazy stuff. I mean, he is a Nexus being. He's essentially omnipotent. He's the alpha of the Council of Godheads. He's almost unrivaled in raw power. Of course, the guy is able to do some truly wild stuff. I mean, just listen to some of this. Odin has battled against a cosmic, sentient superstorm the size of a galaxy, fought against it for days on end, and won. He's fought against the Egyptian god Seth and won, in a fight that shattered galaxies and shook the very fabric of the multiverse. And Odin was weakened during that fight. He had just got his powers back. He still very much thought and reacted like a mortal. And then he's fought against Infinity, who was created using half of Odin's soul, and managed to defeat Infinity in a fight that crumbled entire galaxies. And then there were fights against Surtur. He's actually fought against this big guy quite a bit. He's shaken the 9 realms in one of his fights against Surtur. He's manipulated the whole universe in order to imprison Surtur, and when Surtur's eternal flame was burning its way across the 9 realms and was threatening to engulf the entire multiverse, well, Odin had absolutely no problem with containing that flame and stopping that threat. He's beat Mephisto. He's knocked out Galactus. The guy is a true universal level being, an abstract level entity. He's the Allfather. And here's the biggest thing, the only real way that you can argue that Gorr can beat Odin. It's because Gorr was able to fight against King Thor. If Gorr is able to fight King Thor, and King Thor and Odin are on the same level, well then Gorr can fight Odin. So, are King Thor and Odin even close to being the same? Well, yeah, probably. Thor is tapping into the same thing that Odin is using for all of his power, the Odin Force, except Thor is able to rename it the Thor Force because he's been using it so much longer than Odin ever had. You could even argue he tapped into a whole other level of power, too. Thor was able to beat up on Galactus in a way that Odin never really did, although Odin still did real great against Galactus. And besides, Odin himself even said that Thor was gonna be stronger than he was if Thor ever tapped into his full potential. But here's the thing, the little wrench in all this. Just because King Thor and Odin are on the same power level, that doesn't guarantee Gorr the victory here. Why? Well, because King Thor beat Gorr. This guy right here, he was an old king, a weak king. Hadn't fully utilized the Thor force in centuries. That's who Gorr was able to beat up on. That's the Thor that was begging Gorr to go ahead and kill him. But then Thor shaped up. He's able to tap back into his full potential. Of course, Gorr tapped into his true potential at the same time, creating the Necroverse and became literally an all-consuming universe. And Thor still beat him when both of these guys were at their absolute best. Well, Thor was able to beat Gorr. It's right there on the page. And Odin can do that same thing too. Odin has regularly shown us fights that play out on a universal scale, even some fights that threaten the whole multiverse. And Odin wins time and time again. If that's what it takes to beat Gorr, well then Odin can beat Gorr too. Same as King Thor. Odin wins.